I'm John Heilemann, and this is the Hell and High Water Podcast.
My guest today is documentarian extraordinaire Ken Burns. Howard Bryant, who's a sports writer, a very good sports writer, who's in the series, and I saw a quote from him. I don't know if it's in the series, and I missed it, or if this was maybe to a reporter who was reporting about the series. But Howard Bryant said that he thought that it was telling that Muhammad Ali only became beloved in white America when he could no longer talk. I think that's there's something powerful to that and some truth in it too. So let's just, as I said, we're going to talk about race here. Talk about the way in which you think that race is the central issue in a lot of your filmmaking, and how Ali in a lot of ways is a kind of extension of the work you've been doing on, as we said before, on baseball, on the Civil War, on jazz. It just keeps coming back, this topic, right? Because it's that central to our experience.
I've taken a lot of grief over the course of my professional life because it's always there. If you do anything more than a superficial look at American history, you're gonna bump into the 35 films that you mentioned. Maybe 5, less than the fingers of one hand, don't deal with race overtly. It's just there. I mean, we're born under the idea that all men are created equal, but the guy who wrote that sentence owned hundreds of human beings and didn't see the contradiction. How could it not be at the heart of this story of us, both the U.S. and us, the intimacy of us and the kind of the majesty and the complexity and the contradiction and the controversy of us? And so race is at the heart. It's there everywhere. And, we too often use it as a politically correct addenda to our national narrative, consigned to February, our coldest and shortest month, and not at the, as if it's on the outer orbit of Pluto, and not, at the burning sun, the burning center of our story. It's just there. It's unavoidable. And people have given me so much grief. Friends, even scholars, certainly a lot of people in the press. And by the mid-aughts, people were saying, we're post-racial right now. And then when Barack Obama was elected, they said, now will you stop talking about it? I mean, really good friends. And I held up the Onion magazine, and it said, black man given worst job in nation. I said, just watch what happens.
Yeah.
And, to their credit, most of those people have come back and apologized and said, yes, race is central to us. It's inescapable. It's at the heart of our national narrative, and we have to deal with it.
So you've confronted race at all these different times in the American experience, and you've also made movies over the course of 45 years in the American experience, right? What's different as we sit here in 2021 in terms of both where this story is? I take the historian's eye, and try to look back on this moment 30 years from now, and both how it's being lived and how people react to the way in which we talk about it and consider it. You have kind of a unique vantage on that. Other than the fact that you're white, you're the perfect person to talk about this in a lot of ways.
We're all in this together. There's no divorcing one from the other in these stories. And if you did, then the stories are incomplete. If you feel that you can cover this without dealing with race, then you've got a big problem, much more than my problem of being a white person dealing with it or being given grief by friends and colleagues and critics. Historians are, and I'm an amateur historian, are a kind of a strangely optimistic lot. I don't know why they should be, because they're watching the fact that human nature doesn't change. History doesn't repeat itself. It's just we don't change. And so it seems like it's the same because we react the same way. So there are precedents for all the things that are going on right now. The disturbing part is that these precedents seem to have come from on high, and they seem to have been able to infect and really challenge long-held assumptions and institutions, and that is incredibly worrisome. At the same time, there are precedents. These knuckleheads today look a lot like the know-nothings of the 1830s. The problem is one of the knuckleheads happened to have lived at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. That's the terrifying thing.
Yeah.
And so, we're doing a film right now on the U.S., the history of the U.S. and the Holocaust, and it's really about the ways in which the Germans came over and studied our Jim Crow laws to figure out how to do their early exclusionary laws against Jews, and then stuck around for our eugenics, which people like Teddy Roosevelt and Helen Keller loved, and Americans were buying into Henry Ford's Dearborn newspaper that promoted the protocols of the elders of Zion, and we closed the door, the golden door that Emma Lazarus talked about, that's fixed to the Statue of Liberty in 24, and created a quota system in large part to keep out people who were Jewish and who were Catholic and who were coming from places they didn't want them to come from. But you know the picture of the thousands of Klansmen on the steps of the Capitol, welcomed in the 1920s, given the permit to march. This is us, and we have to face it. And I think the best way to do it is by telling stories in our history, because it gives you the kind of triangulation that perspective allows you to have. But these are worrisome times.
Having seen everything you've seen and lived through what we've just lived through in the last 4 years, you said historians, and you are an optimistic lot. Are you optimistic, having gone through what we've just gone through in these last 5 years?
So usually we've been saying for the last 25, 30 years that we need 25 or 30 years distance from a subject to have the perspective necessary to make the kind of non-journalistic judgments. We don't, the first rough draft of history is just that, a rough draft, and you don't turn it in. And so we need to have that process. But time is accelerating so quickly that, maybe you can lower it. I would really like to be able to treat this. I think at least 10 years has to go by. John, that's the toughest question I know. I am an optimist. I've never been so fearful for my country. I remember at 9/11, people crowded into my living room in my little town in New Hampshire. I don't know why. And I just kept pacing the floor, and I said, the idea cannot be killed. The idea cannot be killed. And people have told me I gave courage, and I gave some reassurance to people who were suffering through those events of exactly 20 years ago. And I am fearful for my republic, and I hope that everyone within the sound of my voice will continue to work with the same kind of efforts that they spent on this last election for future elections, as they limit our right to vote, as they limit women's rights to their access to their rights, that we just have to redouble our efforts, because they cannot win. I've seen what it looks like in other countries, and it's not a pretty picture, and we have to escape the specific gravity of that kind of horror. And it only just takes good people, the cliche goes, to look away and absolve themselves of responsibility.
I couldn't be a bigger fan, and it's not just because I love the Muhammad Ali story so much that I'm recommending it. It is a great thing, and if you've never seen it, if you're one of the rare people in America who's never seen anything by Ken Burns, watch the Ali thing, and then you'll be like, okay, I got 40 years worth of stuff to look at now. I'm gonna have to set aside about 6 months to watch it all. But
that's not what it is.
But it's very binge worthy. And Ken Burns, thank you for taking the time again. Everyone, watch the Ali doc on PBS. And be grateful for
Thank you,
guy
John.
like Ken Burns out there doing this kind of work for us all.
The feeling is mutual. I really appreciate this time and this conversation.
Thanks for watching. You can watch the full episode of Hell and High Water on the Recount streaming daily, or listen to it wherever you get your podcasts.